Welcome everyone to our Thursday Level Up Live. Today we're talking a bit about meditation. As I feel like a lot of you at Fifth know, this has been a field of sort of my study, education, teaching now for a good chunk of the last decade. Something that I'm very passionate about. I certainly didn't used to be. I have not meditated my entire life. It's been probably the last six or 7 years, I think now, that it's been a very consistent thing for me. And yeah, very interested in sharing a little bit more about it, especially through my studies of psychology as well, and the impact that it has on us sort of physically, energetically, mentally. And so the first question I'll look at is, what does meditation actually do for our mind and body, and how does it affect our brain and nervous system? And as it has become a fair bit more popular in the last sort of 5 to 15, 20 years, there's been a lot of research that's gone into it, a lot of psychological research, a lot of physiological research. And the data is really quite clear about what it does. There's a couple of main things that it does to our body and to our brain. So there's studies that have highlighted that 6 weeks of meditating for 10 minutes every single day actually begins to grow the gray matter in your brain. And so it actually begins to increase the cell growth at a very noticeable rate. It focuses quite specifically on the cingulate cortex. So this is the part of our brain that is in charge of our emotional and behavioral regulation. And so through meditation, we actually begin to grow the part of our brain that regulates our behavior and our emotions, which I found super interesting. It also has been proven to have always positively correlated with stopping with increasingly common brain diseases. So things like Alzheimer's and dementia. Meditation has been proved to actually support in reversing the process that begins to lead to those things. Another element that is really fascinating is it actually increases our neural activity and the rate of neuroplasticity. And so for those of you that don't know that word, neuroplasticity is essentially our brain's capacity to begin to rewire itself. And so when we talk about behavior change, when we talk about increasing our own capacity, when we talk about being able to shift the way that we think and the way that we act, neuroplasticity is really the physiological way in which this happens. And so again, through consistent meditation practice, anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes a day, through brain scans, scientists have observed how the neural activity and the neuroplasticity of our brain really begins to increase. We also become more capable of self-regulating our autonomic nervous system. And so our autonomic nervous system is our rest and digest response, but also our stress response. Hey, Max. And we also, so that's the part of us that really is moving in and out of a stress response. Now, as we spend time through meditation, we actually have the ability to self-regulate that. And so often when we are feeling a slightly heightened emotion, what we begin to experience is actually feeling a little bit out of control. So something might happen that's stressful in your personal life, in your job, and maybe you begin to struggle with the ability to change your behavior, to actually meet the task that's in front of you, and you kind of have that sense of being a little bit more freaked out, a little bit more stressed. As you meditate, you actually become more aware of when that's happening, and it increases your ability to do something about it. And so when this does happen to us, things like our breath rate might increase, our heart rate will increase, we'll notice the stress response begin to come and begin to be enacted. And again, through meditation, because we're spending the time to be a little bit more quiet, a little bit more centered, and a little bit more internal, it increases our ability to actually bring ourselves out of a stress response when that's what we want to happen. Another element that's important is when our body spends too much time in a sympathetic state, so too much time in a stress response, that begins to draw excessive energy away from our other functions. And so that's why when we're stressed, we're more likely to get sick. We're less likely to have sort of more regular body functions. And this stress is now, as for those of you that did the Stress Less Challenge we spoke about in the opening workshop, stress diseases are now stress-related diseases are now the number one cause of death in Australia. So the top 5 diseases all weren't in, top 5 leading cause of death, sorry, all weren't there 15 years ago, and they're now all highly correlated with stress. And so as we begin to become more aware of stress states and improve our ability to reconcile them, we're actually increasing our sense of longevity, our sense of health. Another element that is a little harder to measure, and they're still finding ways of doing it more effectively. I can tell you from my own personal experience and students that I've worked with and clients that I've worked with that they have found this to be true, is it improves our concentration and our ability to be single-pointed with our minds. One of the masters, I guess, that I've spent a lot of time studying with, he has a line of essentially saying that, particularly in the West, but all over, we're never actually taught how to concentrate, and we're never taught how to practice concentration. And so often at school, it'd be like, oh, just concentrate, just focus. It's like, okay, but how? We're never actually taught techniques and abilities how to do that. And so meditation with certain techniques actually increases our ability to be more single-pointed with our mind and feel not only be less distracted, but recognize when distraction actually happens. There's a couple of my meditations on the Fifth Element app that are particularly good for that. So the Balance the Mind one, Resting in the Light of the Heart, and Presence in the Heart, they're all essentially focusing techniques that will actually improve your ability to stay and focus on a single thing for a period of time. In terms of the best practice for it to be effective, the ideal kind of gold standard that I would say to people, and is what I practice on a daily basis, is 15 to 20 minutes every day. That is the kind of, in terms of the effect that that will have and your ability to notice the changes that come through meditation, that is probably the gold standard to really aim for. Now, 5 minutes every single day, which for some of us is the only time that we actually have in our life. If you're exercising regularly, if you're, have a family, busy at work, a lot of the time we don't have 20 or 30 minutes every day, especially if we're giving a lot of that time to exercise. And so another point that I wanted to make is that 5 minutes every day will be better than 30 minutes a day, 2 or 3 times a week. And so that levels and the layers of consistency is going to be far more beneficial for our mind, for our brain, for our nervous system than kind of like these big hits. The everyday touch point is going to be far more beneficial from a meditation perspective. And the last, I guess, my last little segment of this little talk is why it's a key pillar of a wellness routine. Apart from all the things that I've just sort of listed and the long-term, both the short-term and long-term health benefits that meditation is proven to do, it is the only thing, well, not the only thing, it's one of the few things from a wellness perspective that doesn't require activity. And so generally in wellness, we're doing things. Maybe a sauna is another example where you're kind of not doing much, or sitting in an ice bath, you're not doing much, but it feels like you're doing a lot because often it can be quite challenging. But generally our wellness routines, it's yoga, gym, running, classes, things that you're quite active in doing. There's really nothing in our modern life that cultivates purposeful stillness. Generally, the times in our life that we're sitting on a TV watching a couch. Maybe we're sitting on a couch watching the TV. We're sitting in a car, getting driven somewhere, or on a train, and we might be on our phone. We actually unknowingly are cultivating a level of distraction. When we're practicing meditation, we're doing something that is purposefully cultivating the ability to be still. We are also purposefully allowing ourselves to spend time with ourselves. Another thing that one of the teachers I spent a lot of time with saying, he said, life is essentially a lot of the way that we set up our modern lives is how much we can distract ourselves from ourselves. We're never doing just one thing. Even when we're watching TV, we might be on our phones. Every time that we're a little bit bored, we're going to choose something to stimulate us. Cultivating a meditation practice is the active ability to de-stimulate ourselves. Because even exercise, if you're doing a run or a workout, generally, and again, we might be listening to music, we're kind of relatively stimulated. We're also quite absorbed in the task that we're doing. When we're practicing meditation and practicing stillness, we're forced to simply be with ourselves. And one of the things I'm a big believer in is that the only person that you're going to have to spend every second of your life with is yourself. And so cultivating a strong relationship between you and yourself is a really powerful and useful and important thing to be able to do. It's also the only thing we do that is 100%, or we can do, sorry, that is 100% for our mind from a wellness perspective. It obviously has physiological effects, all the ones I've just sort of spoken about and listed. But when we're exercising, it is good for our mind, but it's also primarily focused on our body. I also know and have experienced lots of people who might exercise, 6 hours a week, but don't necessarily do anything. It's not necessarily benefiting their mind. Actually, if we're faced with a lot of challenge and anxiety, we can actually use exercise as a little bit of a coping mechanism for that. You can train every single day and still have poor mental health. And when we begin to incorporate meditation as something that is primarily and almost singularly for our mind and our mental well-being, it's another key pillar to something that we weren't necessarily doing or focusing on before. For me, and I know Fifth is very similar, we have 4 key pillars of well-being and of our well-being: nutrition, exercise, meditation, and sleep kind of / restoration. I would also put breath work in the same category as meditation. For those of you that have gone to Kiara's classes, that is a form of meditation. It isn't just because you're not sitting still, doesn't mean you're not meditating. Doing the breath work and counting and focusing in that sort of way is 100% a form of meditation. And so when you include this pillar of essentially stillness as part of your well-being routine, I can tell you from my personal experience how beneficial it is. Something that I have written here that I didn't actually say before as well in terms of its benefits is its ability to help you recover from training. As I have been an athlete for the last 15 years of my life, playing relatively high level soccer, and the difference in my recovery after games from when I started meditating to when I didn't is really quite profound to notice. And I would notice all of a sudden that if I was meditating 20 minutes every single day, how quickly I would recover mentally and physiologically from matches and training compared to my teammates actually was very, very stark as a difference. There's also been some studies in this, but just from a personal perspective, it's a massive element of recovery from regular training. The other thing that it helps with in terms of our well-being, and those 4 key pillars that I mentioned before, is it actually changes the need that you have for sleep. One of the things with sleep that I mentioned in the last Level Up Live is that because a lot of us have so much stress in our system, every time we're sleeping, we're actually purging more stress than we are fatigue. If you have a regular meditation practice on a daily basis, or even 5 or 6 days a week, then you begin to purge some of that stress throughout your day, and you'd actually need less sleep in order to recover from your day-to-day life. I've worked with people that have incorporated 20 minutes a day, especially young parents, for any of you that are out there that don't get enough sleep with your kids. 20 minutes of meditation a day, once you've kind of broken, I would say probably the 2-week barrier, begins to equate to about 2 hours of REM sleep. 20 minutes of meditation is about 2 hours of REM sleep. And so if you're limited in your ability to sleep, whether that's just through your having difficulty sleeping because you have young kids, work schedule, whatever it might be, including meditation into a regular practice will really, really help your sleep, and actually you'll need less of it. I know that now 6-7 years into practicing, for me, I train quite regularly and quite a lot. I do a lot of different things with my work life, and I can pretty easily I'm pretty comfortable and confident getting 6 to 7 hours sleep. And when it's less than that, I don't really notice the difference. It definitely has really changed the need to have sort of those consistent 8, 9, 10 hours of sleep for me, because you're innately more rested. And so it's thinking of it essentially as a way of increasing using a resource to increase your capacity. Meditation is a resource that is available to every able-minded person. And whether your limit might be 5 minutes to begin with, for some people it might be 20, in the same way that when we start exercising, if you haven't never exercised before, it's going to be pretty hard to go for a 10K run, but you can build yourself towards that. If you've never lifted a weight before, you might have to start with 2 kilos or even just body weight. And then maybe after a few months or years of training, you might be doing 30, 50, 100 or whatever it might be. And thinking meditation the same way. One of the easiest ways to stop or to hinder your progress is to having never done it before and immediately start trying to do 20, 30-minute practices. Like I said, having that sense of momentum and doing 5 minutes every single day. And what you'll begin to notice is you actually begin to look forward to it. I think at the start, it can be a little bit of like, oh, I haven't meditated today, oh, I should do this, opposed to actually being something you begin to enjoy. Again, just like exercise, I think when we're feeling unfit, unmotivated, going to the gym can be a real stretch and a real struggle, but it actually begins to be something that you really look forward to. And then at some point, it actually gets so embedded into your routine and into the things that you do, you don't even really have to think about it. It's just something that you do in the same way that you brush your teeth before going to bed. And meditation has the ability to be something similar. And so I think that's all the things I wanted to say on it in terms of like the key points. I really hope that on the back of this, and again, for those of you who did the Stress Less Challenge, that it's something that you might be interested in trying, and to be a bit playful with it, to try and do, 2, 3, 4 weeks doing 5 minutes every day. There's a 5-minute meditation of mine on the app. There's 5 up to about 20 or 25 minutes there, and just begin to notice how you feel doing it, because that's where when we get that sort of evidential feedback loop, I think that's when it really makes a difference. And hopefully a bit of that science and a bit of that theory and I guess evidence-based, psychological evidence-based information maybe is a little bit of a push and a little bit of inspiration as well to try it. So I wanted to leave a little bit of time for any of you that are live on the call. If any of you had any questions on anything I've said or anything that you've experienced and want a chance to ask. Oh, you're
Sorry, I've got a question,
back.
and
Yeah.
I don't know if you're able to answer it in this short amount of time or not, but I guess what you're talking about is getting into a routine of meditation, which I guess is proactive meditation.
Mm.
In terms of reactive type meditation, which the reason I ask is in my work typically, and a lot of people's work, you get asked unreasonable things, and you find that you get to a point where your stress levels do kick up, and I do try to withdraw myself and take like a couple minutes to clear my mind so that I'm not reacting based on emotion, that are actually thinking about the best way to go forward. Because obviously, we need a solution to problems rather than just screaming and yelling and being a toddler. So I guess the question is reactive meditation.
Mm.
How would you do that differently to that, the routine base? Because I guess the routine's obviously like you said with training, the routine's good so you know what you're doing. But I guess reactive, you kind of want a quick
Mm.
fix.
Yeah. It's a very good question. I think that a reactive meditation, it could be two things. Generally speaking, when that does happen and we get that spike of like stress response, essentially the main thing we want to give ourselves is time. And for sometimes that can be 5 minutes, sometimes that needs to be a few days. But taking ourselves away from a situation, because when we're in a heightened state, we are naturally going to be operating from a lower part of our brain. And so essentially when we get into that stress response, we kind of move from, to make this really simple, we can kind of split our brain up into 3 things. Basically, our human brain, which is our prefrontal cortex that no other creature has. Then we have our hippocampus, which is like a mammalian brain. And then we have our brain stem. Like it's much more complicated than that, but just for ease. As soon as we get really stressed and really angry or frightened or fearful or annoyed, we go immediately to the brain stem. So that's also known as the reptilian brain for any of you that's sort of heard that. Now, when we're in that state, we're literally fight or flight or freeze, fight, flight, freeze. They're the 3 options that our evolutionary biology has available to us. And so if you notice that and everyone's stress response is similar and yet different, the best thing you can do to not be reactive in that moment is to give yourself time. Now, that could be taking a walk. It could be sitting down and taking 10 deep breaths. For some people, it might need to be 10 minutes of deep breathing. But in terms of the reactive meditations, there is one on there that I think is called a 15-minute breath awareness meditation. That would be a really good one. I will say that when you're really stressed or in like quite a heightened state, meditation feels very uncomfortable. It doesn't mean it can't be effective and it isn't going to do something. It will do something, but for the first 5-10 minutes, it's going to feel pretty uncomfortable. Because when you're in that state, the last thing you want to do is sit down and kind of like have to be with it. And is why when you have the regular part of the practice, what you're doing is essentially increasing your personal capacity. So if you're really stressed, your capacity to interact with someone through stress is like this. Like that sense of like, I'm already at the top of my, like if I put any more water in this cup, it's going to overflow. And that's going to come out as, tears or yelling or tantrum or whatever it might be. Through meditation, we want to, doing something every day begins to reduce the amount of liquid in the cup. And so our innate capacity to deal with things actually increases and improves. It doesn't mean there aren't going to be still things that trigger you and that annoy you and frustrate you, but your ability to respond to it opposed to react to it is going to be better. But to answer your question, I think taking space and time is going to be the most important thing in those circumstances, if that helps as an answer.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Paul, I think you raised your hand.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I just had a quick question. So, meditation and coffee. Like, I drink coffee in the morning. It gives me a bit of a buzz, but it also leaves me a little bit mentally wired. Should we be doing it like before coffee? And if we have coffee, is it still fine to do it? Or is there any relationship between like coffee, adrenaline, and meditation impact?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. My general advice is always try and meditate before coffee. It similar to like kind of being in like what I just said to Vince, like when you're in a bit of a heightened state, which you kind of feel a little bit with coffee. It can feel uncomfortable to meditate because you're naturally going a little bit more subtle and quiet when you're going inward, and you can notice it a little bit more. For me, teaching yoga, I actually noticed probably in the first 6 months to a year of teaching. I might teach at 6 in the morning, and then I used to teach like kind of two classes, 6 till 7, and then 7:30 to 8:30. And then I have like a 2-hour break, and then I teach again at like 11 or whatever it might be. And I would often have a coffee in that break. And I actually stopped doing it because I noticed when I'd sit at the front of the class and I'd about to start teaching, I could like feel the effects of the caffeine or the effects of the epinephrine, actually probably is more likely what it is. And that was kind of uncomfortable. And I think in meditation, it's the same. And so it's actually a really great way of kind of cultivating potentially like better coffee habits. I know Sam has spoken about this a little bit, that really for me, the ideal time to have a coffee is probably between 9 and 11 a.m. in terms of what the caffeine is then doing, your body not being reliant on it to wake up and all that sort of thing. So if you meditate first thing in the morning, often you'll feel like you could push back the need for that coffee a little bit. And yeah, like I would say meditating after having a coffee is better than not meditating at all. But in terms of best practice, I would say meditation before coffee.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for that. Cheers.
No worries. Was there anything else? Max, did you have anything, or you're all good?
I had no questions. It was just going to listen.
Yeah, awesome. Well, guys, thank you. Thank you so much for joining. I'm back in, I think, 2 or 3 weeks on another Level Up Live. So hopefully see you guys then. And as always, I think you'll have the ability to message me through the app and my details and stuff. So if you have any questions for anyone that's watching this and listening to this, then anything specific around meditation or anything else like that, I'm always really happy to help. So please reach out if you need. But otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and I'll see you in a few weeks.
Great. Thanks, Iggy.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Cheers.